Members Forum today. And let me welcome everybody to our biweekly session. Today will be a town hall, and we have a few things to cover. But I would like to invite anyone to also share topics or issues that they would like to discuss as we go along in the program. So first of all, I have three updates for you from the steering circle of HPAC, our board of trustees, basically, which meets bi-weekly to drive the Healthy Planet agenda forward. So update number one is that we have noted that there's a great deal of attention these days to trying to orient humanity to the great risks that we're facing in the global heating emergency. And the International Association of Actuaries has recently come out with its fourth report, warning that the risks we face are far more alarming than we acknowledge because we're not evaluating the situation on a risk-based perspective. So the steering circle has discussed this, and we plan for our next online conference to be on the topic of the risk framework that humanity is facing. And again, a second update is that a major HPAC project is our effort to organize a first movers coalition of the most vulnerable countries to climate change to come together and champion a global governance system for SRM. And we see now more renowned voices are speaking out forcefully that this is the most plausible governance mechanism to create momentum for supporting research, testing, and deployment. Case in point is Mr. Andrew Light, who is a longtime senior climate negotiator for the United States, working with John Kerry for many years. He declared at a major conference last week on engineering the climate that this is the way that many major environmental agreements have been developed during the past 40 years. Identify a specific topic, a specific problem, with a solution, and draw together a coalition which eventually coagulates into a protocol or a treaty, etc. And the most notable example is the Montreal Protocol. So we began working on this issue about over a year ago, actually. We were right at probably the first organization ever to actually start working on this, and we've made a lot of progress. We're seeing a convergence of possibilities for a number of countries to begin a conversation with each other about SRM governance coalitions. My third update is related to that because our very own Robbie Tulip has taken up the challenge of laying all this out in a new book that he's writing on an albedo accord. And this would be a major contribution to this whole agenda. So those are our three updates from my side. Let me open up the floor for any discussion on these developments before we move on to the next segment of our program today. Robbie, I am on a mobile phone, so I cannot identify anyone who raises their hand. So if you could moderate for the group for those that have raised, has anybody raised their hand so far?
We'll hear from Ron.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to jump in right away, but your comments, Dennis, just induced me. Doesn't take much, of course, to share also something parallel, a parallel effort that has been going on. And let me, if I can just share this. This is actually, it's just right now, it's a proposed I don't know, does everybody see this?
It's coming up.
It's a proposal for the RFF, the Resources for the Future workshop in DC, and they want submissions by May 15th. So Mike and I
Mm,
have started sort of trying to hash something out. And and then we did have Tom Harris take a look at it, and he offered a good suggestion that we've incorporated. And I will shortly be sharing it with a broader group, uh, uh, particularly the urgent response group and the testing and piloting authors and whoever else is interested basically for other possible suggestions. But anyway, it's kind of a parallel thing because it as you know, we're trying to certainly get some attention, as you can tell from the title, and then we're actually talking about all the reasons for it's very much the same thing that you were talking about, that we need to change
mm,
our decision
mm.
making, from a conventional scientific research, the details ignore the suffering. This is Mike's language, actually,
Yeah.
to a climate policy approach to pilot early, address the suffering
Mm,
framework. And it goes on and on. People can look at
mhm,
this later in more detail. But one of the interesting things is, I think, the a coalition of the kind that you mentioned
mhm, mhm,
might and I guess we're sort of more focused on the sort of science and technology angle in some ways, although the it's resources for the future is more of a social. Anyway, we'll see what they think of it. But they nixed us last year. But then I had a conversation with Tyler Feigen, one of the guys organizing it at the AGU 2025, and it was a very amicable conversation. So I have more hope that maybe this time they'll invite us to present. But this so what is this first movers coalition? How could this plausibly? So I guess my the thinking in this piece anyway is that it's highly unlikely that we'll get a universal, a broad, 100 nations coalition, that it just and the time frame is just doesn't we don't really have very much time to get this off the ground. And so
right.
maybe a plausible option is the help doing an international space station that, interestingly, is the cost is about the same, 160 billion since it was started. So it's in the tens of billions per year ballpark. And it's just an agreement between, I think it's
Mhm,
the European Space Agency, Canada, the U.S.,
yep.
Russia, and Japan.
Mhm,
And that might be one way to do it. And of course, there's other human emergency. If the coalition of first movers could declare a Security Council human climate emergency and start treating this the way it should be treated, as essentially as we say here at the end,
mhm.
it's a wartime planning effort. We're facing
Yes.
a war, even though it's an enemy of our own making, but we need to act urgently. So that it's just
Mhm.
kind of another way to say what you were just saying, that we need to
Yes.
change our decision-making framework. But anyway, I just thought so people should be looking out for.
Mm.
We'll be sending this out for further comments and ideas and
Terrific.
suggestions. It's got to be
Yeah.
500 words. So
Okay.
whatever you
Okay.
put in here, you got to take out something or make something more
Okay.
concise. So
Okay,
Great.
I'll show
Great.
you now. Yeah.
let's go on to Paul Beckwith.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Ron is saying, and making a coalition involving many countries in the West, I think, is going to be way more difficult than communicating what we know and what we want to do to China. And
Mm.
that's one country, and China can say, yes, this is a problem to the world, and they can act, they can go and do stuff. They have all the resources, all the money, all the ships, and they build
Mm.
everything in the world for everybody else. Basically, China's run by engineers. It's an engineering state. The US is a lawyerly society, as are most Western countries. They're governed by people who have law degrees, lifetime career politicians. They're not governed by people who understand science and engineering. So I highly recommend a book by Dan Wang to learn more about China. And I'll just give you one example. The Chinese are doing tremendous work in oceanography on eddies, and they've analyzed all the eddies around the planet, up eddies at downwell water, eddies at upwell water, different types in the northern and southern hemisphere, and they've determined the amount of carbon capture from dissolved inorganic carbon in these eddies. And of course, Peter Fiakowski and the Climate Restoration Alliance is proposing to do some experiments in eddies to generate put in iron seeding, generate phytoplankton and all kinds of organic carbon capture. And if that was in an eddy that's downwelling, then this is a very, very scalable, cheap way to capture huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. Now, most of the research on these eddies are done by Chinese scientists. Like I say, if you go back to my video channel, Paul Beck with YouTube, just have a look at the video I did a couple days ago about eddies. I'm contacting the authors of the Chinese paper. I'm also going to visit, I'm in Ottawa. All the embassies are in Ottawa. I'm going to go to the Chinese embassy and talk to you can go to a Chinese embassy and actually talk to an engineer who understands science because they're laced throughout their political system, but China's pretty much a black hole to most people in the West. So when we talk about collapse of society and all these sort of things, please exclude China because they are building for resilience, overcapacity. It's not like build on time, no inventory like the West. So it's a different kettle of fish, and most people are just not aware of that. I would put all my money into China pulling CO2 out of the system, out of the atmosphere, into China being the last people standing. Why not? Because they build everything in the world for everybody else, pretty much. Okay, so
Paul,
that's my spiel.
how about China supporting solar geoengineering?
Yeah.
You know what? It's a nation of engineers. So who's more likely to do it when the people in power are engineers and scientists versus when they're lawyers and politicians and movie stars, and con men in the West.
Let's stop.
Okay, it's not rocket science. Just have a look at what China's doing and how they do it. Those are the people that we need to be contacting, not trying to get a coalition of 100 countries in the West.
But not in the West. If we're talking about a coalition of first mover nations to
Well, we just need one nation to do it, right? And if they imagine this, China suddenly does some of this seeding, and instead of going up 2 or 3 parts per million in a year, the CO2 only goes up, 1 part per million or half a part, and then it starts going down, and the world says, "What the hell's happening?" Well, China's doing this, and then all the nations around the world can start doing this off their coastlines where the western boundary currents are. Most of the eddies are where there's very strong currents, like the Gulf Stream, the Kuroshio Current, the current off Australia, the Aguilera's Current off South Africa, the Brazil Current off South America. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Look at China and what they're doing and who runs China. And if you want to talk to somebody who can understand what you're talking about, you're wasting your time trying to communicate this to Western politicians who have no science background whatsoever.
Let's hear from Ron then Glenn.
Maybe Glenn, you should go. I've already talked. I just want to make a little comment on Paul.
All right. So let's see. So I'll do a screen share here. And so, in theory, with all the things you're referring to, one possible approach is a surge of funding. And so Paul Beckwith is mentioning this thing about the eddies. And so in theory, I think the next step is a scientific experiment where you put some iron into an eddy and see what happens. And then you can verify a model, right? You have a model and then there's a paper that indicates something's correct, but you're not, or is happening, but you're not really sure about it. But then you have to measure things like how much plankton you get per gram of iron, and then for each gram of plankton, how much carbon dioxide you're pulling out of the atmosphere, et cetera. And then you have a cost model. So anyway, so experiment. But then in theory, you could look at what kind of things need to be done to tackle the entire climate problem, which is with R&D. And so I've got a document that looks at all sorts of different experiments that can be done. But also there's the question of how do you get this started? And so there's two ideas for how to get things started. One is a conference. And it studies the following question. Is it possible to solve the entire climate problem with a surge of R&D in key areas? And if so, what are those areas and how much might a climate moonshot cost? And in the conference, each speaker is allocated $1 billion over 5 years to resolve a specific problem. And then the speakers talk about the kinds of things that can be done at these high funding levels for R&D. And so you have top people with SAI experiments and top people with SAI engineering, et cetera, and they could potentially give a talk. So this is one idea of how to get started with, let's say, a surge of funding to do R&D. And another idea is a climate film. And there's different ways of explaining to the world, if you're going to tackle the climate problem with a surge of R&D in key areas, how might that be done? So this document here talks about different film ideas. So these are two ideas. And if anybody's interested in working on these, I would say, please contact me. Also, I'm working on a video that it looks at what kind of things could be done if there were billions of dollars that go into atmospheric science. And I have $1,000 budgeted to hire a climate scientist to help with this video. And so if anybody knows anybody who's a climate scientist that can give me tips on this video, I would appreciate it. Also, I'm working on another video, which will be published in 10 days or so. But I can put these PDF files into the chat window in case anybody is interested in these projects, along with my contact information.
Thanks very much, Glenn.
That's great. Yeah.
Dennis?
Okay.
We do have a couple more hands up, but did you just want to come back in?
Yeah, we do have another segment of our program today, Robbie, and that is that Bruce Melton, our steering circle member, is going to share some of his thoughts on the history of geoengineering. So maybe we could have Bruce go ahead with his presentation, and then we can open it up for the wider discussion after that. What do you say?
And I'll also present about my work on an albedo accord.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. So let's get Bruce's presentation off the boards, and then we'll have an open discussion after that.
Okay, Bruce.
All right. Engineer Melton here. Paul, I love what you're saying about China and the U.S. You're actually absolutely standing on it. China, as we all know, is far leading the world in renewable energy and EVs, and they will likely, I assume, probably be leading the world in carbon removal and geoengineering within just a very few years. It's becoming so obvious, and with the temperature jump, it's going to become even more obvious with Hansen's super duper El Nino this summer. And what I've got to say, before I say that, Glenn, drop your email address in the chat or go to Climate Discovery and find me. And I'd like to talk with you about your film work. I've done a lot of film work for climate change.
Okay. I just put the my email address into the chat along with the document on the film ideas and the conference ideas and this video on atmosphere. I just put that in there.
Good.
I'll
go
say
grab it.
One thing on filmmaking. I was climate advisor for a Hollywood script, and I wrote a second script. I co-wrote a script for Hollywood with all of these sort of things, and I'm working on a third and a fourth. And the third one is all on climate, this geoengineering stuff. So I'm trying to, we're getting traction. We've won all kinds of awards with our second script, but we haven't sold it yet. It's all or nothing in Hollywood. You hit the jackpot or you don't. But I'm working on that. Also, I'm training as a stand-up comic, and most of my stuff, of course, is climate related, science related, it's just another way. I'm trying all these different things to get the word out to educate people. So anyway, you do what you try. You try it and it works or not, right? So just thought I'd mention that about the film stuff. So I know a lot about the Hollywood film stuff from script writing.
Paul, you too, Aria, you too. We all at least four of us need to be talking about films and climate change. I mean, my secret is the blues. You know, my band plays the blues. Our films are mostly rockumentary adventures. They're not talking head documentaries. And Aria's got a line on it too.
You know, when we could have a Zoom meeting to talk about filmmaking and just go around the room and everybody could talk about their, their projects and their experiences and what they're bumping into. And
yeah, I'd really be very curious to learn more about your scripts as well, Paul. I've got a TV pilot I've been working on for some time. It's called Revolution Earth. And I originally co-created it with Jeff Abogov, who was a writer and producer on Cheers, Roseanne, Two and a Half Men. But he let me really take the wheels at this point in time. And so I'm really the sole writer on the actual pilot. And so I have been getting it out to some film festivals and waiting to hear back. I got an honorable mention from one. Yeah, planting some seeds to figure out the next steps. I really want to get a showrunner who's got the kind of experience who can make sure to get it done is one of the things I'm focused on at this point. But yeah, I'd be really curious who you've been reaching out to with this as well.
Yep. Sure. I mean, the main director is Michael Schultz. You can look at the Wikipedia page on him. He did a lot of the sitcoms in the 70s and 80s and 90s that you've heard of. Things like, I don't know, Starsky and Hutch. You know, he did a lot of different, like he's 86, I guess now, but he's very much involved in still script writing. And there's a lot of climate issues in a lot of his work these days. So
there was a film that was published 2 days ago called Plan C by PBS by Bob Kalina. So that's an example of an SRM film.
I hadn't heard of that.
It was just 2 days ago that it was released. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. But there's also
Sorry, go ahead.
The Hollywood Climate Summit happens in Los Angeles. And, that's a great place to meet other climate filmmakers, of course. Have you been to that, Paul?
No, but I was going to go last year, but couldn't at the last minute.
Would you like that? Yeah. Would the film people like to have a Zoom meeting where we chat film? Another Zoom meeting? Is there interest in that?
Sure.
I'd love that.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Because there's all these details. I don't know if the rest of the group is interested in hearing about all our trials and tribulations, but maybe we could.
It's a process. It's a real process. Yeah.
Glenn, can you put it together?
Oh, that'd be great.
Sure. I can send out an email, I guess, and say, yeah, if you something, yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's get back to Paul, to Bruce.
Yes.
Okay, I just emails in the chat. Okay, so this is a work in progress. I've been working on this for a while, and I just haven't had enough time to do it. And especially recently when I discovered that I was going to be able to do this for you all, because I got a gig at Fikowski's Climate Restoration Summit in Dallas next Tuesday. Share entire screen share. Oh, that doesn't look right. Can y'all see Can y'all see anything?
I can see myself.
Yeah.
How about now?
That's better.
Oh, okay. So what I want to talk about, I think this might help. This is a good way to explain what everyone is calling geoengineering to non-geoengineering literate people. I apologize. I've got a new version of PowerPoint, and it doesn't allow me to play videos. directly, but I've got my video that I wanted to play right here. Can y'all see this?
I can see it.
Okay, so we got one of the, if not the earliest form of geoengineering known to humans, agriculture. And agriculture for food first, for cows, livestock, all sorts of greenhouse gas emissions and loss of sequestration. You also see in the background there, this is in the Texas Hill Country. We've had tremendous tree kill from oak wilt and drought, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. So I was literally out filming the big floods in Kerrville last summer, and I ran across, well, it was all over. I filmed dead trees all over, but I just had to get the cows in front of the dead trees. And just come to find out, agriculture is one of the huge reasons why we have geoengineered our planet to pieces. And come on, where is it? So geoengineering, as we know it, you all know these definitions. But is this really what geoengineering is? Or is it what we've been doing with cows? Or is it what we've done with our society in general? We've cut down half of all the forest across the world, and we did 35% of that before we started burning fossil fuels. And here, I'll get to that in just a minute. We got different, here, can y'all see this? Y'all can see that, can't you? We've got different definitions of geoengineering in just a few places. And these are a few places that likely remember terraforming Mars, which was a big hot discussion thing in the 70s and 80s. But since then, geoengineering has been hijacked. And does it really mean manipulating our climate to reduce human-caused warming? Or is that climate pollution treatment? This is the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Geoengineering from nutrient runoff, another side effect, a geoengineering side effect from agriculture that started 8,000 years ago. And, once you take the trees off someplace, it starts losing nutrients right away. I'm sure almost all, if not all of you know, the huge nutrient loss problem we have in our soils across this planet. Let's see, what's next? So yeah, when you pull forest off, you not only lose sequestration, but you lose much of the stored carbon that was in the wood to start with. And also, again, this is a great audience to talk to, because you all know that half of the carbon stored in a forest is stored in the soil, and much of that is lost when you pull the trees off. So what is geoengineering? This is William Rudimann's work, the early Anthropocene hypothesis. And what he posits is that 8,000 years ago, right after the last interglacial maximum, humans learned agriculture. They started clearing to grow food. 6,000 years ago, that food turned into massive rice cultivation in the East, which is, just adds global warming potential with methane. The warming caused by the loss of the sequestration capacity. Oh, I missed a slide. Where'd I go? I'm sorry, folks. Again, this is the first time I've done this, and I have been, there it is. Just got it out of order. The loss of sequestration capacity and the emissions from the cutting of the forest I didn't put this in a slide yet. It was mid 300 gigatons of carbon, 1,000 gigatons of CO2. Something similar to what humans have emitted in all time. It caused a degree C of warming average globally, several degrees C in northern latitudes. It allowed, let me go back, it allowed our temperature, this top orange line, basically to stabilize instead of falling like it should have done according to orbital cycles. Typical interglacial warm period. Again, great audience. You guys all know that our last interglacial of up to 10,000 years is the longest interglacial we've seen in over 1,000,000 years since we really started having interglacials, since we started having regular ice age pulses. So we should have cooled, but geoengineering of cows, and I can't go back to my video of cows, and where'd my forest go? And forest are in there somewhere, you saw it. That caused a lot of warming. So what really are we trying to do? What we're trying to do is we're trying to de-geoengineer or un-geoengineer. And examples of this are what we have been doing across the planet since Roman times with combining sewage with stormwater runoff or with river flows. We're diluting the sewage so that it's not near as much of a problem as it was concentrated in the ditch behind the house or in front of the house. Romans started doing this 500 AD, I believe, about that time. There were a few societies before that that practiced sewage collection and discharge away from habitation areas, but the Romans are the ones who built the sewers to last. This is a combined sewer discharge somewhere up in the Northeast. There's still 700 combined sewer discharges in the US as per the EPA. What else we got here? Heat treatment. You know, how do electrical generation facilities, industrial facilities, how do they deal with their excess heat? They treat it with water, and then they've got to cool that water off somehow. You do that through cooling reservoirs. This is one chemical plant I worked on where I grew up down in Houston area. This is their treatment train. You can see what looks like a normal wastewater treatment train right here, but they've got lots of lagoons. And here we've got a cooling lagoon that doesn't need any nutrient treatment. You can see the water coming up here. Right there is there's 4 jet generators. What are they called? Little generating station for this big chemical complex that makes polyethylene. Their cooling water, they pump it in from their storage reservoir right here. This is Mustang Bayou. It runs into, this is Galveston Bay right here. This cooling water comes down through here, and then it goes through this baffle and around here and through that baffle and that baffle to make a longer path before they discharge it so that it cools. They're cooling their heat pollution with the ambient atmosphere. They're diluting their heat pollution. Again, right here, these are cooling towers. You know, you all have seen these. They're all over the place. They cool through evaporation. They move the heat from where it is pollution. They dilute it into the bigger atmosphere, which is what we're trying to do with what what most people, civilians, call geoengineering, but what really is pollution treatment. It's pollution of heat treatment. So what we're trying to do, is it really geoengineering or is it ungeoengineering or de-geoengineering. What we're trying to do is just simply treating climate pollution. And that's all I've got for you right now. I just wanted to share this. I just thought it was really enlightening in a way to help overcome the difficulties that we're having with trying to get people to understand that what everybody is calling geoengineering, this cooling that we're going to do, emergency temporary cooling, is something that we've been doing for a long, long time. And y'all, I'm sure you know that these are cloud trails, basically marine cloud brightening that we've been doing since we've been burning fossil fuels in ships. So that's it. Thank you all. Do you any questions, comments?
Well, I want to just back up. William Rudiman, has written some of the best books on paleoclimate that I've ever read, and I actually studied under some of his books in university, and I taught a climate change course based on his book. I mean, it's just brilliant stuff, and you've gone into it nicely about, we'd be in an ice age without our emissions.
Getting close.
Yeah, we'd be pretty close. We're actually probably going to cancel an ice age by our anthropogenic emissions. And also the geoengineering has been hijacked by the chemtrail people and all these other nonsense.
And by my colleagues at Sierra Club in the environment are wonderful environmental tribes. That it's just through ignorance. And this is what I try to do. I mean, I helped Sierra Club. Literally, I was the one responsible in our climate policy committee in 2019. I talked them into lowering our warming target from 1.5C to 1C, because 1.5C, basically we all die because that's tipping. If we get back to within the natural evolution of our Earth systems at 1C or less, then we've got a chance of stabilizing our Earth systems that are now being degraded or tipping. And so I have a tremendous problem with not only geoengineering, but with carbon capture with my environmental colleagues.
Yeah, I mean, mainstream scientists, the whole thing, like net zero. Okay, if we net zero and end up at 450 ppm or whatever, we're still going to have all these catastrophes around the world. It's not good enough. We got to go back to a stable level that humanity evolved under, right?
It's even worse.
I know,
it's worse than
insane.
Having catastrophes. Yeah.
Yeah.
We lose 10 times all of the carbon that humans ever emitted in natural systems if they fail. And tipping is failing and their degradation has begun. And once degradation begins, you don't stop the degradation unless you remove the thing that started it. Aria, sorry.
Okay, Aria.
I mean, there's so many things. I mean, first of all, we've got to be able to use language that people understand, of course. And, when it comes to geoengineering, the way people understand it, I like to really just kind of shift the framing to what, we have been unintentionally geoengineering for quite some time. And now we need to restore a safe climate, because it's so unsafe where we're heading. But also, I really would love it if we could switch the framing to net negative. Net zero is not going to do anything for us. We have to, if we can change our goal, then we can start opening up the conversation for what we're going to have to do to reduce natural emissions as well as human emissions, and that we've got to restore safe levels. We're not going to be able to restore safe greenhouse gas levels through net zero right now. So if we were to get that across, I just think it would change everything and open up much larger dialogues about where we're actually at and what our goals actually need to be. And it's very simple framing. Net negative is one word change to something else that people have already established who know about climate. They're accepting net zero. If we shift it to net negative, it's just such an easy way to reach people in a new way.
Very good, very good. And let's move on to Ron. Now he's got his hand up, and then Robert Chris.
Well, just hopefully a quick comment. The so Arya, I agree. I mean, the net zero is a problem. So you're saying net negative human emissions to offset all the increase in natural emissions that Bruce was talking about, the positive feedback, the negative feedback, whatever. But the reduction in the increased GHG being emitted by natural systems due to our warming effect. So yes, net negative, and the net negative has got to go really negative. And actually, in this, one of the things that some of you may have seen Tom Harris's piece that Mike reacted to, that was sort of the impetus for the proposal that I put up there. But Harris points out, he does these little linear projections. He says, and the SAI at some point loses its efficiency when you try and cool too much, because the SO2 you put out, the aerosols start coagulating and they become less and less reflective. So there's kind of a limit to how much cooling you can do just with SAI, and he pegs it around to 2160. But I'm sorry, where are we? Anyway, so in right now we're in 2026, so it'd be 2060 or thereabouts, the second half of this century. Now one of the problems again is because by the time as this goes on, and this was a comment that Tom actually made in reference to that piece, is, it would be good to put in the economic chaos that many of us have talked about, that, climate change doesn't just disrupt natural systems, it disrupts human societies. And if we keep warming like this, we're likely to see a degradation of our ability to respond. And so precisely, so if we have an economic collapse, say Trump is, tanking the fossil fuel economy big time, which is great. I mean, it's horrible what he's doing. He's killing people, destroying, but inadvertently, he's also demonstrating why fossil fuels are just not something anyone can depend on, for energy. So I think, that is likely to have a very damaging effect, damaging in economic terms and global GDP growth, and and sort of cause recession, downturn, recession, something, kind of a slowdown of, and that's what climate science have been predicting for years, that eventually this is going to come back to reduce growth by perhaps 25% or 50%. That the actuaries are coming up with these estimates by the later half of the century also. So that would certainly reduce emissions. We'll have a much smaller economy, but it's not going to do the drawdown. The drawdown requires active, effort. It requires human agency, and that could be seriously compromised if we continue on the path. So it's a reference to your comment, Arya. So it's the negative part is really essentially could take centuries. I'm sorry. I keep going on. Sorry.
Very good, Ron. Thank you, Robert, and then Glenn.
Yeah, I think Arya brings up a really important point, which is all about the framing of this. And one of the issues, I mean, obviously Bruce is in the early stages working on his project, but of course the focus there is, and the whole language of net zero and indeed net negative is all about emissions. But we know, and HPAC above all knows, that this is a three-legged stool. It's not a one-legged stool. So it's not just about the emissions, it's also about all the other stuff. And in fact, I sometimes think that a better way, I shouldn't say the best, a better way to frame all of this is actually to move people's awareness to the top of the atmosphere and explain that really what we need to do is we need to have in mind the energy balance at the top of the atmosphere. All this stuff about cooling in sewage farms and cooling towers has no impact on global warming. That's just moving heat from one place to another. What cools the planet is very, very simple. It is radiation. All of the energy that either warms or cools the Earth enters or leaves in the form of radiation. It never enters or leaves in the form of heat. Okay? There is no matter at the top of the atmosphere that will conduct or will convey heat. It all goes in the outgoing energy is all in the form of long wave radiation. So we need to kind of get into people's minds that it's actually about the energy balance at the top of the atmosphere. And there are only two ways that you can address this. You either reduce the amount of absorbed solar radiation, or you increase the amount of outgoing long wave radiation. End of. Now, there are lots of different ways of doing each of those. And we don't need to go into detail about those. We've got lists of them all over the place. We know what they are. But I think that the framing of this needs to kind of move away from the detail, and it needs to focus on the really critical issue, which is getting the energy balance right at the top of the atmosphere. Because if we don't do that, we are buggered.
So I just want to respond for a moment. First of all, I just want to say, I think when it comes to focusing on energy balance, that's something that is so hard to understand for people who are non-scientists. And the net negative framing in my mind, what it does is help open up the door for deeper discussions about how warming leads to more warming because of forest fires releasing more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, methane being released, and so that's why we have to add cooling, and we have to add reflectivity. We have to add this understanding about thermodynamics to the equation in order to get net negative. So, that's where my mind goes. It's like it's just a couple of words that help open up the kinds of discussions that we do need to have beyond net negative, just by having that other goal.
I understand that, and I'm not suggesting for one moment that the discussion about net negative is inappropriate. It's absolutely part of the story. Absolutely. And it's important. The point I'm trying to make is that you could go the plausible maximum amount of net negative emissions ain't going to solve the problem. Okay? It isn't enough. And so the problem with focusing on net negative is there's a danger that you then downplay the other part of the story, which is equally critical, equally mission critical. So you have to have some way of getting people, and I'm not trying to kind of create the language here. I agree with you entirely that this has to be presented in a way which is accessible to people, but it's essential in my mind to get people to understand from the outset that the net negative, important as it is only part of the story, and we have to find a way of getting, excuse me, of getting them to embrace simultaneously the whole question of reducing the absorbed solar radiation. Okay? And there again, there are lots of ways, not just SAI.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Let's let Glenn and Bruce respond. Glenn?
Okay. So there's a couple of points. One is, with respect to all these things that you want people to do, one option is YouTube video, and this is an example of that. This is a website. It's called aplantosavetheplanet.org, and there's the links to videos at this website. And a lot of work goes into each video because you've got 100 slides or so on average per video that have to be put together. And there's one that talks about climate science. There's one that talks about the things that we don't know about climate science. There's a video that talks about reflecting sunlight. And then there's a video that talks about SAI. And so that's an example of, ways of communicating. And also, the video I'm working on now it looks at the United Nations cost data for decarbonization, and you can calculate how much money it costs to get to zero emissions using this data. And then you can also look at the cost of direct air capture. And these numbers are prohibitively expensive. And also they increase exponentially. So this next video that'll be published within 10 to 14 days or so are looking at costs. They're looking at prohibitively expensive problem. And also there's the question of who pays those costs. You have individuals which are not paying those costs because they don't benefit. Instead, they want the 8 billion people on the planet to collectively reduce their own emissions. My own emissions are too small to be relevant, so I'm not going to lift a finger to so to speak, as a consumer. And this is observed behavior. And then you have companies that have to keep their costs down to be competitive. This is observed behavior. And then you have governments that are dominated by political guerrillas. So whenever money goes into a government for climate, very little of it goes to lowest cost decarbonization. Anyway, this is observed behavior. And so this video that I'm working on right now looks at all that, and also looks at with R&D, you can do SAI field experiments. And the next video after the one I'm working on is looking at SAI field experiments at the billion-dollar level, which we're not doing. We're not even running SAI right now at several $1,000,000. Right now, I think the research in SAI has been several million. But if we're going to stay on track to reflect roughly 1% of sunlight by the year 2040, we'd have to be running research at the level of hundreds of millions of dollars to billions. Anyway, I'm going to be looking at that at the next video. So with videos, that's one way of communicating to the world a path forward.
Very good, Glenn. Absolutely true. We've got to ramp up research tremendously. We have Bruce and then John on tap. Bruce, you want to respond to some of the comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I've got a third thing to add to net negative and energy imbalance. Energy imbalance is, yes, it's quite difficult, even for a lot of scientists. Net negative is, it's for some scientists, it's pretty difficult, but it's pretty darn difficult for a lot of civilians. What civilians do know, what scientists know, what experts know is pollution treatment. And what are we trying to do with climate pollution? It's frames are everything. And if we talk about something using terms that people understand, those people will understand what we're talking about. If we talk about net negative and energy imbalance to Joe and Karen Sixpack, they're not going to have a clue. They're just going to say, is that just a bunch of that liberal nonsense? And, it's not, but to them it is, because they don't understand it. That's all I wanted to add. And cool. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Talking to Joe and Carol Sixpack. That's our
Karen.
Karen Sixpack. Very good, Bruce. Let's move on to John.
Sure. Thanks. In fact, I was going to go back to Bruce and his presentation and say, I think that you're really on the money on a couple of dimensions that need to be explored much more deeply. Number one, that we've been geoengineering so long as we lived on the planet. I don't think it's right, a minor point here, Bruce, to sort of think it started with agriculture, because it actually started much, much further back in all sorts of ways, not least with fire. And fire had a massive
nomadic
influence
burning,
on the
right?
planet.
10,000 years ago, maybe 11.
So that's what I'd say. I'd take it way
Goes back 40,000 years to the extinction of the megafauna.
and beyond in megafauna in Australia.
True. You're not wrong.
But so that's one dimension that I think, that's a minor spot though. I think the engineering and broadening that and saying everything we do and the impacts on the planet is engineering, and it's geoengineering in very many cases. I think that's a kind of a theme to broaden the debate helpfully, away from simply SAI. Second, I think you're on to another thing that's good, with the notion of dilution as a response to pollution. And what do? We're actually transferring in by form, number one, we chemically perhaps. Number two, by space, and that's kind of a bit what you were sort of showing with the cooling towers. But number three, by time. So another way that pollution is removed is through time. And that leads right back in to another question we've talked about before, which I think is relevant to the dilution and pollution theme, is risk and variability. And I think that you could probably very helpfully throw that in, because risk is, of course, the concentrations of, in the word you're using, pollution at certain times or in certain locations. So, there's kind of a lot to play with there. So I'm very supportive of the direction you're moving. Bruce, well
Yeah,
done.
there's thank you. The risks is something that a lot of our toxic chemical air pollution regulations utilize. And what we do is we've got all these receptors around our toxic chemical generating facilities. And when those sensors go off, then we know that something's wrong, that something's been violated. But the sensors don't go off until they reach a predetermined point.
Yep.
Which means that you can have a wicked bad leak somewhere. And through dilution, if it's a really windy day, if it's a really ozony day, that pollution may be the risk of harm from that pollution may be diminished enough to where the receptors don't pick it up by the time it gets to the property line. Same leak on a different day could cause cancer down the road for who knows how many people. How far out from the receptors. So risk. Yep. Thank you. That's a real good one. And I like the adding the three forms of pollution treatment, yep. Chemical dilution and time.
Yep.
Very good. I'm just about to run out of power on my mobile, so I'd like to switch over the moderation to Robert, who is next in line to comment. Robert, take it from here, okay? Because I'll be offline soon.
Okay, what I might do is just let Robert Chris comment first, because I want to change the topic to discussion of the work of our insurance subgroup and my work on an albedo accord. So I'll just let Robert Chris finish off this section and then change topic. So Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. Yeah, it was just a really quick comment about just picking up on John's point about time. I think the reason that I took the position I did earlier is because we need somehow to convey to the public that dealing with the pollution, dealing with the emissions is vital, but it isn't sufficient. And it isn't sufficient because it doesn't matter what approach you take, it will not act quickly enough to avoid the kind of disaster that we are contemplating. Okay? And so because time is of the essence, in a very real sense, we have to find some other mechanism to intervene at greater scale and speed. It's the buying time argument. And you can't do that with the emissions control, with the pollution management and so on. You can only do it with some kind of intervention on reducing absorbed solar radiation. And that's why I think, it needs to be there up front. So people, I'll leave it to others to kind of work out how to convey this people to the six-pack family. But it's vital that part of the message is up there right front and center from the beginning.
Okay. Aria?
Thank you. I just wanted to also share, I sent an email around earlier sharing some of Rafe's work on trying to create an upper limit to sea level rise. And I bring that up now because I do think that's an extremely important metric to add besides just the 2 degrees, trying not to cross that threshold, because that doesn't mean anything to so many people. But when you focus on real world impacts and what that's going to do to our water supplies and homes and all kinds of things, agriculture, that helps people to understand the kind of emergency that you're talking about. And it also helps people to focus on the framing of what are we going to do to avoid that kind of catastrophic sea level rise. And the answer is going to have to come back to reflecting sunlight, preserving ice in key areas, and that kind of geoengineering framing that we are used to hearing when it comes to focusing on restoring a safe climate. But these are conversations that are going to happen when we change our framing a bit, whether it's carbon negative, the way I like to think, or net negative, or focusing on sea level rise and the impacts of that and what we can do to avoid that kind of catastrophe. So I wanted to add that. And also next week, I'm not sure if you guys saw this email, there's going to be a convening of multiple countries who really are determined to do something to shift to renewables. And they're going to be focusing on the financial framing. And when we focus on the finances behind it, it seems like a no-brainer to so many of us. So that gives me a lot of hope that we might get a real agreement beyond those countries who aren't willing to make commitments. And that kind of agreement can be key toward making it inevitable that other countries have to change what they're doing just to keep up with the technology happening elsewhere and how prices are going to be going down elsewhere because of better technologies. So little seeds of hope.
Thanks very much, Aria.
Yeah.
I'm going to now switch the topic to the discussion of our insurance subgroup and my work on an albedo accord related. And so myself and Dennis, Sev Clark, and also Brian Cady. Brian's here in our meeting today. Nice to see you, Brian. And have formed an insurance subgroup for HPAC, and we'd welcome other people to join us. We will be meeting hopefully next week with Sandy Trust, the author of the series of reports from the UK Actuarial Institute on planetary solvency, and just the question that one of the reasons why insurance is such a key issue is that the insurance industry has a strong commercial interest in reversing warming, and the challenge has been to get the industry to engage on that. And I had a really good conversation, I thought, with Sandy Trust and Meta Spencer on Project Save the World, and Sandy explained that the insurance industry is still very profitable despite the retreat from markets caused by global warming, and so they're simply not interested in how to reduce climate risk because they're doing fine, but that's a very short-term view. Like we see that the amount of insurance payouts due to climate change is doubling every decade, according to the reinsurers, and that's not a sustainable situation. So the issue in terms of a theory of change, as I see it, is that we need to get insurance industries to lobby governments to support cooling. Because the problem with all of the ideas that we come up with about how to reverse climate change is that we simply don't have the money to get those ideas out to a broader audience. And so a series of affected industries, starting with insurance, but also banking, real estate, and agriculture, tourism, defence, even the energy industry, have the potential to fund a lobby group that can engage. So I'll share. I sent an email on the 6th of April to HPAC and to the Planetary Restoration Action Group, and that included links to the draft introduction of my book on planetary on sunlight reflection, and an albedo accord as the way to address it. So I'll just share a few thoughts from that. Let's see. So that was the email, a progress report with the book outline and a writing plan, and the title, Sunlight Reflection, the Business Case for an Albedo Accord to Rebrighten the Earth and Cool the Climate. And it's essentially, I'm saying that the key constituency for achieving policy change on climate is the business community. And so that working out how it's possible to speak in a way that engages people in business is a key challenge, because at the moment they are simply not engaging. So I've got a Substack, Rebrighten, and also I'm establishing a website, rebrighten.com, alongside the existing website, rebrighten.org, aiming to both support this book on an albedo accord, and I've shared the draft introduction. I do have drafts of 10 chapters, but I need to work on them before I share them. So I've got a little bit of discussion so far on the introduction, and I welcome more discussion. So where we're at is just one second. So I'll just go through some of these things. I've been working with a publication company called Leaders Brands, who put out business books, and I'm hoping to raise money for a book launch, and so that's part of the plan. So the purpose of the book is essentially to target the boardroom and explain the commercial interest in cooling, and so is shifting how industries think about climate risk. And the idea that an albedo accord could be a Montreal-style treaty framework is, I think, really vital. And the really important points about the Montreal Protocol were that it's been the most successful climate and environment international agreement in history. And the reasons include that it had a narrow technical focus. And so while it's obviously essential that people continue to work on carbon as a climate agenda, there needs to be a narrow focus on albedo, and bringing together a coalition who can support restoration of albedo, which has fallen by 2% this century. It's causing a lot more short-term warming darkening is causing more short-term warming than new emissions. And so getting that sort of understanding out there is really important. So targeting these industries, as I've mentioned, and policymakers, and the idea of a first mover coalition of nations interested in albedo management, I think, is a really key challenge. But to achieve that, I think that we need to get business interests on side to support funding. And we're seeing countries like the Nordics and India and others starting to get that interest, and that needs to be supported and grown. And so secondarily, philanthropists and climate communicators and think tanks. So the world has not only warmed, it's darkened. Darkening is a major driver of warming. on the time horizons that matter. Decarbonisation can't deliver cooling or reduce risk, so we have to govern sunlight reflection, and we have the HPAC triad leading to an albedo accord modelled on the Montreal Protocol, and a theory of change requiring focus on commercial risk. As I've said, aiming for about 40,000 words, and the chapters. The planet's going dark when warming becomes insurable. What's happening with planetary darkening? Why cutting emissions isn't enough? How life cools the planet, and climate politics governing sunlight reflection, the Montreal Protocol, geoengineering methods, benefits and risks. How cooling first can make carbon action easier. Moving from the boardroom to the treaty room as part of a theory of change and a vision of rebrightening the Earth. So I've shared this document already, and you can see, have a look at it with the publication strategy and the description and call to action. And so that's where I'm at, and I'd welcome any response on those issues. Thank you. Aria?
I just put something in the comments, but when you were talking about that, I was thinking about the recent image I saw from the most recent spaceship that went up, and you could see the image of Earth prior to that and how much muddier it was. And I mean, those two images side by side, and it just occurred to me, I mean, I hate to use it because it's so overdone, but, make Earth bright again with those two images just feels to me like it would be a very striking message.
Yeah, and it's this view from the moon that we've just had from the Artemis spaceship, and seeing the reflections of the astronauts. I think like the fact that it's now 2 or 3% darker than it was when the Apollo mission happened is a way of exploring that. Greg Slater?
Yeah, thanks, Robert, for presenting that, and it's certainly wish you well on that. A couple comments. One is it's interesting to me that insurance companies seem to have a short-term outlook, which seems amazing. The second was the only thing I wonder about the modeling on the Montreal protocols is that, I mean, the Montreal protocols were a ban effectively, right? I'm trying to get past the ban, but that's my only concern about that comparison. But anyway, those are my comments.
Okay, thanks. Ron?
Yes, thank you, Robert. I think, the work you're doing is really important. It's certainly, getting out the message that we need to cool, and taking that to private industry in particular is absolutely essential. I guess, and this, I'm just kind of racing to see if maybe I think is there a way to turn the Albedo Accord into a first mover coalition for cooling? Because I think the Montreal example doesn't really work very well, because as we've had this discussion before, it's impossible really to measure cooling locally, or it's not GHG, it's not a public good. It depends very much where you do it, when you do it, how you do it. Changes, daily, hourly. Some places you need warming. You definitely need warming. You don't need cooling. So, I mean, it's just not the kind of thing, this homogeneous thing like CO2 equivalent that you can sort of compare everything and give credits for, and do that, and as a decentralized kind of market mechanism, a way to reduce GHG emissions, which I think does have to, that's kind of the obvious way to do it. The Kyoto Protocol that unfortunately collapsed, just design it better and make it more accountable. But for nations. But so that's where I just, if there was a way to turn that emphasis on cooling on albedo to make it a more operational, pragmatic kind of accord between nations to go out there and do the cooling, not to set
Well,
up the,
exactly. It's about
yeah.
governing cooling, and I disagree with your comment that cooling is not a public good, because it very definitely is a public good, and that's actually a theme that I explore in the book. So it's like lighthouses. Nobody has a personal interest in paying for a lighthouse, but the whole shipping industry benefits from them. So governments support it. So eventually, the aim is that uh, weather management, climate management needs to be recognised as essential global infrastructure. You can't have 8 billion people on the planet without the public good of climate management through sunlight reflection. So it's going to be one of the biggest industries this century. It's going to rival aviation and pharmaceuticals, and the only way that can happen is through a governance focus. And so a narrow governance focus on albedo, and like there's a whole related area of thermal as well as light management. But yeah, so I think obviously there's differences from the Montreal Protocol, and as Greg mentioned as well. But the key thing of a narrow focus that brings together business, science, and government is, I think, the key reason why the Montreal Protocol succeeded. We'll have Ted Parson joining us in a couple of weeks to talk about the lessons from the Montreal Protocol for climate, and so Ted, obviously, one of the most distinguished climate commentators, and yeah, so thanks, Ron.
Robert, just one quick comment. It's a global public good, top of the atmosphere, but it's not divisible into chunks. That's where we part ways, I think. You can't trade it and compare it and measure it in individual little chunks. So that's the difference here. Like the ozone you can measure.
But so, if we cool the Earth, then we can expect that the insurance payouts for hurricanes won't escalate as fast as it would otherwise, and fires and storms and so on. And so there's a commercial interest, and we can similarly say, the whole skiing industry faces severe risk from warming, and so they have a commercial interest in funding albedo restoration as a public good, and so getting that argument through to these industries is what I'm really interested in. Let's hear from Paul.
Yeah, a couple of points. First, to Aria's point. Yeah, NASA published this image of the Earth from 1972, the blue marble image, and then published an image right next to it. And the image right next to it from today looks all washed out and polluted and hazy and stuff. But the problem is the 1972 image is from a camera. It's enhanced. The modern image is actually, the lighting of the Earth is from the moon, actually. It's not from sunlight. So there's no comparison whatsoever between those two images. It was very misleading of NASA to publish those pictures side by side. That's the first point. And that's confirmed multiple places. So unfortunately, we can't use it as saying that the Earth is washed out and darker. The second thing, if you did a public survey, I would be willing to wager that 90% of people in the public have no idea what the word albedo means. Yep, everybody knows what brightening means. So maybe in your book title and stuff, I'd highly recommend that you don't use the word albedo. You're going to lose people right away. They won't even pick up the book. They don't know the word in the title. I guess, I'm hoping that you're giving anecdotes about groups like MEER, MEER, which is doing a lot of work to try to brighten local communities in Africa and other places to reduce the effects of heat waves. They're basically putting mirrors on rooftops to lower temperature and negate the need for air conditioning. And they're doing a lot of work on this. This is Yi Tao, who's been attending a number of the climate conferences pushing this idea. So anyway, it's an interesting group, and I think it's a good example of, what an individual can do with very little money in communities that are very poor to make livable urban areas, and it's all through reflecting more sunlight. Um, so those are just a couple comments. I mean, we can measure Earth reflectance very accurately from space. So we can talk about the overall albedo or reflectance of the Earth very accurately and how that has changed. And it feeds right in directly to James Hansen's work on Earth energy imbalance, et cetera. So anyway, I think it's great stuff. Robert, there's gazillion insurance companies, but there's only dozens of reinsurance companies. Many of the reinsurance companies are based in Bermuda. They're all concentrated there for some reason, and I have
That's
family members that work in several of them. So if you ever have problems getting through to talking to some people in these
right.
companies, I might be able to help. And I know Bermuda inside out. I've been there quite a few times to play chess and bridge and so on over the years. My sister-in-law lives in Bermuda. I might be going in a couple of weeks to visit her. So if I do go, I haven't decided, but if I do go, I could try to. I scuba dive. I love doing that. They're the northernmost coral reef in the world, and their coral reefs are still relatively healthy, while the rest of the world is losing theirs. But the reinsurance industry is really concentrated there, and I can talk to, I think there's public reports from some of these on which you've probably seen. But, rather than talking to insurance companies, I think your time is much better spent talking to the reinsurance companies. Because if reinsurance companies weigh the risk as super high, then this is going to affect the entire insurance industry. Because without them, the insurance industry doesn't exist.
Absolutely, and those are really good points. Thank you very much, Paul. Really
Okay.
appreciate that. And so I was speaking about the insurance industry and meaning the reinsurance companies as the key entry point. So that's a really good point. On the use of the term albedo, like the same point that you've raised has been discussed quite a bit, and I think the way I see it is that albedo is a technical scientific term, yes, and it's not so well known. So, like, for example, I had an article published in The Hill about this topic, and I had suggested including the word albedo in the title, and they removed it. So that's but the way I see it is that what we need to do is change the public understanding and perception towards a more scientific approach to the world. And like, given that it's the albedo accord is something that's intended as a specialist technical agenda, that the use of the word albedo is reasonable. And so, putting sunlight reflection as the headline title, and then it can. The way I see it is that it can help people who are unfamiliar with the concept of albedo to learn about the science. And your suggestion about following up with companies in Bermuda, that's awesome. Really appreciate that, and we'll follow up with you with our insurance working group.
Yeah, and I think albedo at the very beginning of such a book, I would say, I would give some examples, like, walk around your neighborhood. That road you see that's asphalt has a 10% albedo. The lake you're looking at has an albedo of, 4 or 5, less than 10%, unless you're looking at an angle and then it's very bright. And the bathroom mirror is 92%. And, the white paint on the roof is 87. Snow on the ground is really high. The snow melts. Suddenly it's very dark. Like, just give everyday examples. I mean, we're all aware of this. The public is all aware of this, but they don't know it by that name. So yeah, I mean, it could be a subtitle. you know, I mean, part of it is really educating people about what it is and what's possible by changing it. Yeah, so it's great stuff. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. So we've just got 3 minutes to go, so we've just got time to hear from John Dixon and Robert Chris.
Thanks, Rob. Great work to be moving ahead on this. Number one, I was going to speak to reinsurance, but Paul has already done that. That's great. Second, I would not shy away from the use of albedo as a term, because I do think we need a degree of differentiation as a matter of public education, and not everything can be just lumped together into simple language. So, I support that. But the piece I really wanted to dive down into is, because insurance companies are doing very well right now, thanks very much. So neither they nor their shareholders are particularly concerned to change the game. And the game of business, of course, is very high discount rates, short-term decision making, because that's what drives the profits. And there's relatively little or much lower priority to think about the really long-term strategic market shares. So that's the kind of conundrum that I think needs to be unbundled and talked about in the book somewhere, because and the final connection to that is in many boardrooms, the closest many boardrooms come to climate related appropriate behavior is because it came from government, either inducement or regulation. So it's not so much insurance companies influencing government as it is government putting some room, defining the scope to maneuver or scope to act for the companies. So I think that's a bit of a two. You want to sort of move towards a two-way logic rather than a one-way to company to government. And then the piece is that even if insurance companies or a portion of private sector comes on board, it does not actually necessarily influence in the slightest bit the boardrooms for fossil fuel companies or all the associated sectors. So that's a kind of you must have been thinking about that dimension of which boards you're going to market to in order to have an effect.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks, John. Look, we're out of time, so let's just finish with Robert Chris. Unmute, please.
It's a very quick point, just to say that have you thought, Robbie, about whether albedo, which really talks about the ratio of sunlight reflected from Earth, it includes space-based activities, space-based mirrors, because of course there the sunlight reduction is not part of albedo because it's actually happening outside of the Earth's sphere of influence. And actually what's going on here is if you include that, you then are focusing on the really critical question, which is not actually albedo, that's part of it, but it's actually the reduced absorption. The reduced absorption of solar radiation. That's the critical dimension. So just a question about how you include space-based mirrors in that process. Because
yeah, look, I think as I commented, there's a whole series of related technologies, and I would include, things like oceanine fertilization and OTEC as technologies that have the potential to help stabilize the climate, but they can be lumped under the umbrella of albedo because the main thing is to restore planetary reflectivity, and then look at the various other technologies that can also help to stabilize the climate. So thanks, Robert. That's a good point. I suspect that the space-based approaches will prove too expensive for quite some time, but it's good to see the research happening on them.
I think you might be very surprised by that. I think that there are all sorts of reasons why they may become very, very attractive. given the huge amount of concern there is about the risks associated with SAI, whether those risks are reasonable or not. But you could have many, many lower risk, a much lower risk profile with space-based mirrors. Anyway, just a thought. And I think, that there are technologies that are being developed to do it. And I think that with a moonshot mentality, that it could be done in 10 years, no problem.
Yep, and Glenn's left us, but he's opened up the concept of a climate moonshot. Now, John, did you want to make a final comment? Or your hand's still up? So,
yes. Let me just make one additional point that was in my mind. Rob, the fantastic albedo lends itself, just like solar panels on roofs, to a very significant degree of individual action. And individual action in some societies and economies has actually taken us a long way forward. So albedo in that space is something that could be is much more implementable, and that's not a boardroom question by and large. It might be a startup's boardroom, but it's certainly not the established major insurance companies. But keep that thought in mind about individual action in relation to albedo. I can paint my roof white, to pick up Paul's point. That doesn't need a board or a government or anybody to do that for me.
Yeah. All right.
The problem with that, John, very quickly, the numbers are really.
Oh yeah, sure.
Are a real problem. That's a problem to scale that to anything sensible.
Well, I've got a discussion for that too. We'll have another one day, Robert.
Yeah. It opens up so many interesting points. I just wanted to shout out to Newton, who's sitting there with Paul.
Yes, Newton. And we had a debate when we called him Newton. The other option was albedo, actually.
Right, great. Well,
Good name for a dog. I was going to call him albedo, but
he's the right color for albedo.
Albedo dog.
Newton,
I have one of those too.
Newton was better. So
that's not because he's got his balls in a cradle, is it?
Yeah, so Bruce, get a dog and call it albedo, and then bring it on with you and help your
public outreach.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a really good discussion. So we'll put the recording of this up on HPAC. And thank you all very much for joining. Bye-bye.